I know that as adult action figure collectors, a lot of us think the toy companies are sitting there with their evil minions figuring out how can we twist things to make things unfair so that some figures are better than others. A lot of this comes from the original sort of price-value quandary, the Jawa from 1978. For those who were young enough to get one, the original Jawa came with a vinyl cape, like Obi-Wan or Vader. But it wasn't long after that the vinyl cape was replaced by a cloth one. This was done to increase the value of what was otherwise the smallest figure in the line at the time. Of course, the reverse effect in the long run was that the vinyl cape Jawa became the most expensive one on the aftermarket because it had the shortest production run. But the point is, the reason some figures are upgraded to cloth, again like Yoda here getting a cloth outfit, was to increase the value of what would otherwise be a small figure. Now, this phenomenon is not, of course, limited to vintage figures from the 70s and 80s. This has happened throughout figure lines. To keep on the Star Wars train, when Attack of the Clones came out, most basic figures were a figure and a few accessories. And then, of course, there was Effet Mon, who was a giant chunk of plastic that was ridiculously huge for the price point. So you could pretty much fit Yoda in his mouth, and the smallest figure inside the biggest figure's mouth. Crazy. So how is it that with figure lines that everything is supposed to be the same price point, sometimes you get a lot more and sometimes you get a lot less? Sometimes you get figures that are loaded up with accessories and have extra deco or, shiny deco, all sorts of things, jetpacks, etc. Sometimes you get figures that are extra tall and still come with a large amount of accessories, guns, goggles, blasters, the whole nine yards. And then the exact same assortment, you get a smaller figure that is half the size and comes with two small accessories and very little deco. Or a tiny figure that comes with a tiny accessory and that's it. But all for the same price point because they come in the same assortment. So how is it that value and price are connected in the toy industry when not all figures are clearly treated the same? Well, a lot of it has to come down to consumer perception. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Someone might value a Ghost Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ghost Yoda more. And while it's great on sort of the outside to think that everyone is going to get the same exact amount of everything, size, deco, accessories, it really is about dividing resources when it comes down to how the toy industry works. That many times a finite amount of resources needs to be unevenly divided amongst an assortment. The idea of giving everyone an equal amount isn't always possible. When you have a certain amount of resources and a certain amount of figures in the assortment, sure, it's great if everyone gets the same amount. But it does often come to things like a Sophie's choice, if you will, on which figures are going to get a little more and which ones are going to get a little less. So let's dive in and do a little toy history. Or maybe in this case, a little toy business review. So the total cost of any product, toy or fluffy candle, is going to be labor, material, plus transit. So there's multiple ways you can cut costs in any product. You can reduce the amount in the product, in this case with a toy, plastic, or deco. And some product is going to get what's thought of as the lion's share of those variable aspects. More plastic, more deco. And it really is up to the design team and the brand management team to decide sort of which toys get that magical pixie dust sprinkled on them and get a little more, like Effet Mon. And the variable costs that you can change, things like deco or the amount of plastic, meaning the size of the figure or the number of accessories included, are things that can be controlled. Things like labor can't be controlled. So as an example, this recent vintage series assortment had 3 Baby Yodas. And while it's definitely a good idea to have Baby Yoda because he's popular, he also costs significantly less to produce. He has less plastic and less deco compared to the other figures, especially Boba Fett there. So by putting more Baby Yodas in the assortment, not only are you putting a more popular character, but you're putting a character that costs less, which helps offset the cost of the total assortment. Let's look at another example. And here's probably one of the most famous ones of cost value in modern action figure adult toy collecting. Malbolgia, the 1995 Spawn figure. When he came out in the basic figure assortment, it pretty much blew people's minds away because not only was this figure like 3 times as large as any other figure in the assortment, but he came on a basic figure card. He came in an assortment with regular Spawn, if you will. And he was pretty much like falling out of the blister. He was so heavy. He was huge. It was ridiculous. So how does McFarlane do this? Well, when you have a figure that you're putting into an assortment that is more or less like 3 times the size of a regular figure, McFarlane, one of the things they were so good at was dividing up costs not by figure but by assortment. So they didn't mind paying more for one figure because they could take away resources from another figure in that same assortment. So as an example, a figure might have less deco or less overall plastic. Again, the 2 things you can actually change. You can't change the sculpt, more or less, and you can't change labor or logistic costs to ship the product, but you can reduce the amount of accessories, the amount of plastic, and you can reduce the amount of deco. Maybe that's why Angela here has that famous Party Angela variant. Go ahead and Google that for more. So by doing other figures like these single-colored gold series that they did, it could help offset the cost of larger figures. Even if they didn't ship in the same assortment, it was the same company, and it was the same, probably spot on the P&L. So a figure like this, or the green plasma Spawn that had almost no deco, could offset the cost of a larger figure. Another more current example is what Hasbro does with Marvel Legends. You'll notice with the Build-A-Figure assortments, the largest piece of the Build-A-Figure often comes with the figure that is physically the smallest and or has the least amount of deco. So a lot of times the female figures wind up with the huge chunk of a Build-A-Figure. And this is because the female figures are physically smaller, and in the case of the Dawnstar and Spider-Woman here, they have less deco than other figures in the assortment. Now, of course, there's another approach to doing bigger figures, and that's to do a deluxe assortment. And this has been done traditionally with kids' assortments by having larger figures or figures that have larger amounts of accessories come in a different assortment, a different SKU. It's a different spot on the P&L, a different price point, so you can charge more to the customer to justify the inclusion of extra accessories or, well, maybe more deco. Maybe not in the case of kid-aimed deluxe figures, but more and more we're seeing this in adult collector lines where the deluxe SKU is being introduced in order to justify a larger piece count and include both more accessories, or in the case of something like Thanos here, a physically larger figure. A character that might need to be a Build-A-Figure if it was in the regular line, but here it can be released as a single carded figure at a higher price point. So they don't need to worry about a cost reduction, they just charge more. The same thing can be done for deco. This Boba Fett figure has a ridiculous amount of deco compared to basic figures, and that's why he's deluxe, not necessarily price point. Other figures in the deluxe line are physically bigger, meaning Black Series line, like the Maestro figure, or with Grievous here, again, a bigger figure. But bigger, meaning more plastic, or more deco, puts it off of the same price point. So while figures have been improved or had value added by having either cloth or more accessories, Yoda is a perfect example. In Power of the Force he got a backpack, and in the vintage line he got extra accessories like a snake and a cloth cape back when figures really weren't getting cloth. That wasn't really truly introduced until Return of the Jedi. And while he was physically smaller, he was so small he could fit on another figure's back, you could see the price value because he had added soft goods and he had more accessories. Whereas basic Luke, very little deco and 2 basic accessories, so your price value was that he was a standard figure. So this has been something that's been happening in the toy industry for decades. And while in the real world we like to think that everyone is equal and everyone should be treated the same, and yes, they should, except of course the Martians, which nobody likes, it's not so much true in action figures in the toy industry. Often, less expensive figures can be used to offset the cost of an entire assortment to make it affordable. And by including more of the less expensive figure in assortment, it brings down the total cost of that one particular wave, making it more affordable to hit what's called the target cost that's assigned by management. You have to bring in the full assortment at a specific cost. And really, action figures are kind of like the heroes they represent. They act as a team, and when they come together and work together, well, they can help bring the overall cost of an assortment to the target cost. So the smaller figures help pay for the bigger figures. Everyone's working together. Hey, just like they do in the content. So that is price value in action figures. I hope this clarified, and if you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments below. I always answer back. Thanks for watching.